Welcome to another podcast of I Don't Want a Divorce. We are passionate here about saving marriages in crisis. That's what we do mostly. Now, we're also passionate these days about helping you recover if you've suffered a divorce, especially an unwanted divorce. We've got a brand new book for that. As most of you maybe know, I Didn't Want a Divorce, Now What? Now, before today's topic, which is based on the book I Didn't Want a Divorce, I ask you to help us by leaving a rating and a review on Apple Podcasts and share this podcast on social media to help us grow our ministry. Now, as I said, the current podcast series, this particular podcast, of course, and the series we're doing now are based on the brand new book, I Didn't Want a Divorce, Now What? Subtitle, How to Deal with Your Ex and Your Kids, Heal, and Get a Reset. Let me read the back cover here so you can see where I'm going with this book. Divorce was the last thing you wanted. Now that you are divorced, you need to, and here's the list of things we cover in the book, among other things, stop feeling guilty about the divorce, because so many good Christian people feel terribly guilty over divorce that was not their fault. Learn how to deal with your ex, all right? Most exes are difficult. That's why they're exes, and I teach you how to manage that person. Learn how to deal with your children, both younger and older. Heal completely from your trauma, and divorce is a trauma. You've got PTSD. You absolutely do. How to heal from that trauma and forgive. Very important to forgive. That takes time. It's a process. Grow closer to God, which is what God wants, of course, and find the right person to date and marry if you're going to remarry. Dr. David Clarke's Divorce Recovery Plan will empower you to pick up the pieces and build a brand new happy life. That's exactly what God wants you to have, no matter the circumstances of your divorce. Now, today's topic is don't feel guilty for divorcing your abusive spouse. I've covered in a previous podcast that there are 3 reasons for divorce in the Bible: abandonment by a non-Christian spouse, adultery, especially ongoing unrepentant adultery, and chronic unrelenting abuse. Now, when I use the term chronic abuse, I want you to know exactly what I'm talking about. Here's my definition taken from my book, Enough is Enough, How to Leave an Abusive Relationship. If you're still married to someone who is an abuser, then this is the book for you, Enough is Enough, How to Leave an Abusive Spouse. But I'm very careful about how I define abuse. It is a pattern of narcissistic, disrespectful, and harmful behavior exhibited by one person in an intimate relationship. First of all, it's a pattern. I'm not talking about 1 or 2 incidents of abusive behavior. I'm not talking about a decent, loving spouse who is guilty of the occasional insensitive action. I'm not talking about a man who seriously sinned but confessed, repented, was in recovery, and helped you heal from what he did to you. What I'm talking about is a man, or it could be a woman, but I'm talking about a man here, a man who abused you on a regular basis. He started abusing you early in your relationship, and he never stopped. In fact, he was never going to stop. As I say, it's just as likely that the woman's going to be the abuser, but I'm talking about the man in this particular podcast. And in the book, I refer to the man as being the abuser just for ease of communication. Could be the woman. Narcissistic. Almost all abusers are narcissists. Your ex was and still is a spectacularly selfish individual. Everything he thought, felt, and did focused on one goal: to protect and please himself. All about him. Your ex didn't love you. He was only capable of loving himself. He did not meet your needs because he was never even aware of your needs. That was never going to happen. His needs were important. These narcissists think, well, if I'm happy, well, my wife must be happy. Not necessarily, of course. Disrespectful is the other category. He mistreated you in a variety of ways, any of which qualifies as abuse. Verbal abuse, constant criticism, refusal to communicate. What's it like living with someone who shuts down and will not talk to you about a particular topic or a difficult topic? Just won't do it. Days, weeks, months of the silent treatment. That's abuse. Control, anger outbursts, substance abuse, lying. The list could go on and on. These are abuse. He may have been physically violent, but even if he never hit you, his emotional abuse was just as damaging and traumatic, if not more so. Your abuser had no conscience. He never felt guilt or shame when he hurt you. He had no empathy, no compassion, and nothing was ever his fault. Everything was always your fault. Even after the divorce, everything's going to be your fault. If you were in pain and he was aware of that, well, that wasn't a problem for him. That was your own dumb fault. That's how a narcissist thinks. That's how abusers think. And of course, harmful. He was breaking you down day by day, month by month, year by year. He was damaging you emotionally. She was shredding your self-esteem. He took away your identity. You suffered depression, anxiety, and had no hope for the future. People come into this office, and this is my therapy office here. You can see the blue couch. Every week, 2, 3, 4 people who have been divorced and now have to rebuild. And they are not in a good place if they live with an abusive spouse, for sure. He was also damaging you physically. The toll on the body of living with an abuser is awful. Fatigue, exhaustion, and a host of stress-induced physical issues were your constant companions. Just this last week, I talked with a lady who did finally get the gumption up, and God released her, and she divorced her abusive spouse. And I told her, and she's had all kinds of physical problems for the last 10 years, thanks to him. I said, you know what? You're recovering now. You're going to be in so much better shape physically. I can guarantee her that. Almost always happens because the stress is gone, the day-to-day horror of living with an abuser. He was also damaging you spiritually. You didn't have the energy and the focus to be close to God and serve Him. That's taken away too. Recently, I did a phone advice session. I do a lot of phone advice sessions with folks across the country. I did one with a woman who had divorced her abuser. Boom, like the previous one I just mentioned. This is a different woman. She told me I was married for over 20 years to an abusive man. He never hit me, but he emotionally abused me on a regular basis. I tried everything, as most wives do, but he wouldn't change. I finally had enough, filed divorce, and divorced him. Now she tells me, now he's blaming me for the divorce, to which I responded, of course he is. It's always your fault. He asks her ex, the miserable abuser who destroyed the marriage, he asks, why would a Christian file for divorce when she had no biblical reason? He is now hammering her with that. Others, including my children, are blaming me for the divorce. Often happens, especially with adult children. I feel so guilty, she said. Did I sin by divorcing him? I talked to many spouses in the same situation. I'm going to summarize what I told this woman. It's the same message to you. If you divorced a chronically abusive spouse, don't feel guilt. Listen to me. Do not let this abusive, sinful man shame you. He is continuing to abuse you even after the divorce. You had the nerve to divorce him, and he wants to make you suffer forever for that decision because that made him look bad. Image is everything to an abuser. Look, you lived with the abuse long enough, probably too long. Your abuser was never going to change. He had years of opportunities and blew every single one. You tried the marriage counseling. You talked to the pastor. You read the books. You begged. You asked. You pleaded. You cried. He could have cared less. Wasn't going to change. Why should he change when he did nothing wrong and it was always your fault? I call the people that want to guilt you the guilters, and they're shameful. And many are good, decent Christians, in quotes. It's very common, though sickening, to have many persons in your life blame you for the divorce. Your ex certainly blames you because he always blamed you for everything. He lies to everyone about you. He tells anyone who will listen that you were the abusive one, not him. It's always opposite or with these abusers. He wasn't abusing you. You were abusing him. And now you abused him by divorcing him. Baloney. He tells others with a smirk on his narcissistic face, well, she filed. Like that makes a difference. It does too often in the Christian community. His only focus is that you filed. He won't mention anything, of course, about his abusive behavior over the years that led to you filing and gave you biblical reason to file. Because he doesn't think it was abusive. Abusers never think they're abusers. The fact that you filed fits his twisted, stupid, it's her fault narrative perfectly. He insists that you had no right to file. Your children, especially your adult children, may blame you for the divorce. Very common scenario and really hurtful. They're used to you taking the blame. You did it all along. Plus your ex spent years poisoning them, feeding them lies about you. That's what these guys do. More on children, especially adult children, in a later podcast. And I handle younger children too, in the aftermath of a divorce. Members of your own family may blame you for the divorce. His family will blame you, but that's expected. Blood, especially sinful blood, sides with blood. It hurts deeply when some in your own family blame you. Your divorce is causing them to be uncomfortable and inconvenienced. Well, God forbid that should happen. Nobody cares about the pain you had to go through. Some of your own friends may blame you for the divorce. I should say ex-friends, because any friend who sides with your abuser should be dumped right now. These persons are calling you a liar and they don't care about you. Get rid of them. They can be friends with your ex. Go ahead. Your pastor may even blame you for the divorce. He may say you had no biblical reason to file. As we saw in the previous podcast, oh yes, you did have a biblical reason. Chronic, unrelenting, never going to stop abuse, emotional abuse is in fact a biblical reason for divorce. That's what I believe. I believe the Bible teaches that. There's one more person who blames you. This is the toughest one to convince that the divorce wasn't your fault, and that person is you. You are allowing your abusive ex and these other guilters to still be in your head. You know what you did wrong? You broke the rules for good Christian wives. These persons who blame you did not see and experience all the pain and carnage your abuser caused you. They all expected you to continue to be the good little Christian wife and stay married no matter what. They don't care if you're in agony. They don't care if you're miserable. They don't care if you're falling apart physically and emotionally and spiritually. Tough. Stay married. That's not what God says. So you broke the rules for good Christian wives by divorcing your abuser. Not the biblical rules, that's the good news for you, but the old school Christian community rules, which are still in effect in most churches. These unwritten rules state that you are supposed to stay married, tolerate abuse, and be quiet. The sad reality is that in many churches, even if your abusive ex had filed on you, the divorce would still be your fault. In these churches, marital problems are always the wife's fault. These churches, in fact, breed and support narcissists. Many pastors, church leaders, and Christian people want you to shut up and stay married. They don't care if the abuse is destroying you. Well, God says you can get out. You don't have to, but God says you can. He's fully in support of it. Never discount the amazing ability of your ex to convince others the divorce is your fault. It's very important to him that everybody think it's your fault. Church people, friends, family, your own kids, neighbors even. Most abusers are very persuasive, brilliant, world-class liars, and they even believe their lies, so they come across as sincere. Listen to me, your divorce is legitimate in God's eyes, and that's really all that counts. You know what I say? Of course you filed for divorce. Of course you divorced your abuser. That was a healthy and, yes, a biblical thing to do. Not an easy thing to do, and it took you years to do it, didn't it? But you did it. Your abuser was destroying you. I don't use that word lightly. It's true. Destroying you and destroying everything precious to you. And he was never going to stop the abuse, ever. Not that you require confirmation, but his continued efforts to blame you and make you suffer confirm that divorcing him was the right action. So guess who destroyed the marriage? Your abuser destroyed the marriage, not you. Your abuser ended the marriage, not you. You simply formalized what he had already done. Ongoing, never going to stop emotional and or physical abuse is a biblical reason for divorce. You don't have to divorce an abuser, but the Bible teaches that you certainly can do so. God is fine with your decision to divorce your abuser. God knows that there are marriages that need to end in divorce. Yours was one of those. God wants you to heal, he wants you to recover, and he wants you to build a great new life. That's the last thing your nasty ex wants. He wants to continue to punish you. You need to get over that. And I think reading through this book and following my program, I Didn't Want a Divorce, Now What, can help you do that. So stop the false guilt. Stop beating yourself up for the divorce. Stop allowing your stupid, mean, lying, vicious, sinful, abusive ex to blame you for the divorce. Stop allowing others to blame you for the divorce. Now here's what I want you to say to these people that are trying to guilt you, and they're going to be in your life. You need to respond to them. It may not change their minds, but it's for your own empowerment. Plus it hopefully will shut them up. Here's what I want you to say to these dunderheads, these gooberheads who have the nerve to blame you for divorcing your abuser. Now say nothing to your ex. That's a waste of time. That's pearls before swine, as we see in Matthew 7:6. He wants a reaction from you, so ignore him. Give these responses below here that I'm about to give to all others who blame you. Give one of these responses one time to each person who tries to guilt you. If they try again, ignore them. Okay, life is too short. Here's how you can respond. So, you'd prefer me staying in the marriage and being destroyed? Put it back on them. That's what they're saying. How many more years of destructive abuse do you think I should have endured? Give me a number, and then wait for the number. That'll shut them up. Chronic abuse is a biblical reason for divorce, tell them. Do your research. Why is it so important for you to defend the abuser? Again, turn it back on them because they're defending the abuser. They'll try to tell you, well, he wasn't abusive. Excuse me, I live with the guy. I should know, you can tell them as you walk away. You can say my only fault was staying as long as I did. I gave him a million chances to change, and you know you did. You can say he's a wonderful liar and he's fooled you. That's your problem, not mine. You can also say I've taken enough emotional abuse in my life. I'm not taking any more. Never blame me for the divorce again. Final. You don't give these assertive responses for these guilters. They're probably too stubborn or dumb to get the truth, frankly. But your snappy comeback should shut them up. And it's okay if you can't respond right away with these comments, get back to the person. Text, email, phone, that's fine. Now, you need to know some things that will make your recovery process more effective as we move forward in these podcasts based on my book, I Didn't Want a Divorce, Now What? I'm going to cover these things in my next podcast. And again, remember this book, I wrote it for you. If you're divorced and you didn't want the divorce, I didn't want a divorce, now what? It will help you in the recovery process. So until next time, Dr. David E. Clarke, PhD. And I guess I want to add .com because that's where you can get to my website where you'll see all my resources, davideclarkephd.com.